Pope Francis was discharged from the Gemelli Clinic on March 23rd to continue his recovery at home at the Casa Santa Marta within the Vatican. How is he managing to govern the Church Universal after, by all accounts, a close brush with death? And who in his inner circle is assisting him? Here with analysis of this question and much more, the editor of Catholic World News, Philip Lawler. Phil, thanks for being here. As I mentioned, Pope Francis is continuing his recovery at the Vatican in his apartment. And since then, Vatican business has rolled along with the appointment of a new Archbishop of Omaha and a decree advancing 5 causes for canonization. In a March 29th interview with an Italian paper, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Secretary of State, assures the faithful that even on his worst days, the Pope is still governing the Church. Now, Philip, Parolin also acknowledged that at times Pope Francis has been unable to he can't sign the document, but he just puts his initial, a single F. Your reaction?
Well, the questions that you asked at the top of the program, I don't know the answers to those questions. How is Pope Francis governing the Church? I don't really know. Who's in charge, or who are the people closest to him who are making decisions when he can't? I don't know the answers to that. Pope Francis has never been much for delegating authority. He's done things by himself. And now it's very clear he can't do by himself all the things that he was accustomed to doing. So who's doing them for him? Or are they not getting done? We really don't know the answers to those questions, and probably won't for a little while. It's pretty clear that he is, I don't want to say incapacitated, but he's not able to do nearly the sort of things that he would like to do. Just the other day, the latest bulletin from his doctor said that his lungs are getting better. Well, getting better after more than a month of intense work, that indicates they're still not perfect. He is still very much a patient, requiring 24/7 medical care, unable to talk normally, apparently unable to use his hands normally. So he's very limited in what he's able to do.
Yeah, well, in that interview with Corriere della Sera, Parolin also says that Pope Francis is resting and not receiving visitors or holding meetings, and that no definitive plans have been made for Holy Week, Easter, a big canonization on the 27th. Philip, given the severity of what the Pope went through, double pneumonia, I mean, as you mentioned, it seems obvious that he is somewhat incapacitated, and he'll have to delegate those Holy Week and Easter services to a cardinal. But what do you make of the statement that the Pope is not taking guests or meetings?
Well, he's taking some meetings. He's met with Cardinal Parolin. He's met with Archbishop Peñapera, the Sostituto. He is meeting a few of the Vatican officials, apparently Cardinal Fernandez, because Cardinal Fernandez spoke as with authority about the Pope situation. So he's having a few meetings, but he's also spending a lot of time in therapy and a lot of time at rest. So we're entering a period of the pontificate where you do notice a lot of other prelates are sort of flexing their muscles as if this is the time when they can begin doing things that in the past maybe they wouldn't have dared do because the Pope would countermand their actions.
Yeah. What's your take on the Vatican communications during this time? Really, from Francis's illness and hospitalization and now into his recovery. Have they been transparent enough for you? Clear enough?
Not really, but better than they were in the past. They did let us know that he was seriously ill. They did let us know after the fact that he was close to death, but I think reading between the lines, we knew that at the time. In the past, they've been much worse. You remember with Pope John Paul II, they were loath to admit that he was sick when it was obvious to anyone who saw the man. So they're getting better, but there's still an awful lot we don't know. That reflects the management style of Pope Francis, because he has, as I say, always been wanting to do things himself and to control the narrative himself. Well, he's not in a position to do that now.
I also want to get your take on this quote from Cardinal Parolin from a March 27th event, and I quote, "Perhaps he won't be able to work as before, and in that case, we must find different ways for him to continue leading the church," end quote. Phil, what do you think that means? Different ways of leading the church, and what are they? Why are they just figuring all of this out on the fly?
In a way, they have to. Pope Francis has no interest in resigning. I don't know that he has to resign. After all, the Pope, there are very few things that the Pope absolutely has to do. You can let the machinery roll on, and every once in a while you come to the Pope to put his initials on a piece of paper. And let's face it, that situation might be very enjoyable for a lot of people around Rome.
Well, Phil, Parolin has weighed in on, this is Cardinal Parolin, the Secretary of State, for those of you just joining us or not quite sure of all the players. Now, he has spoken out just this week on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Russian-Ukrainian war. He's received the President of Poland. He presided over the 20th anniversary Mass of the death of, commemorating the death of St. John Paul II. Is he the vice pope or positioning himself for the next conclave, do you think?
Yes. There's no way around that. Someone has to represent the Vatican in formal international affairs, in church affairs, and it falls to the Secretary of State. So Cardinal Parolin would always have been on the short list of papabili if a conclave were coming, and I think now unavoidably he's at the top of that list. That doesn't mean he'll be elected, but he will be the most visible cardinal going into the conclave whenever it happens.
Mm-hmm. I want to show you something. This is an interesting example of a statement, I'll put that in quotes, issued by the Vatican and Pope Francis. It's a produced video of Francis urging the faithful to use technology to unite, not divide. And you can see the images here. The video was released on April 1st. We do not see current images of Pope Francis, and his voice was recorded before he was hospitalized in February. There's a disclaimer at the end which speaks to that. Phil, what do you make of the video and the impression it leaves, particularly given the dire nature of the Pope's health right now?
Good question. I don't think Pope Francis is vain about his appearance. I do think that he is reluctant to let people see just how weak he is. And the one public appearance he made on Sunday before leaving the hospital was actually sort of shocking. He let's face it, he looked very bad, and his physical condition is obviously weakened, and the doctors have said that the problem that he has with his lungs is not going to go away. So there is a distinct probability that this problem is going to come back again, and I think he's, as I say, reluctant to alarm the faithful and let the people know that his health is really I won't say in jeopardy, but it's not secure.
Yeah. I want to move on to a perennial problem for the Vatican. The case of disgraced artist and former Jesuit priest Marco Rupnik. The Jesuits announced they're offering reparations to 20 women who've come forward accusing Rupnik of abuse. And this week, the Bishop of Lourdes decided to cover Rupnik's artwork at the French shrine out of respect for the victims. Interestingly, the shrine at Fatima is not considering removing or covering the large Rupnik mosaic in the Basilica of the Holy Trinity, but they have decided to suspend all use of those images containing the artwork. Let's start with what should be done with his art. We'll talk about the case in a moment, but what should be done with the art, Phil, in your estimation?
Well, actually, I think it should all be trashed, but then I thought that long before the scandal erupted around Rupnik. I hate his
Me too.
work. So that's, I'm not sure I'm answering your question properly. I think that...
I'll take it, Phil.
The artwork, to me, actually, it sort of matches what one has learned about him. Those the faces, the elongated faces with the big dark eyes, you see that sort of picture from abuse victims. I can't, now that we know that background, I can't separate the
Yeah,
history from the art. It's not like Caravaggio.
yeah.
This is
No.
a different sort of thing.
Well, they're a distorted view of humanity. They're a distorted view of these saintly figures. And you're right. There's those dark, huge eyes. Sometimes they share eyes, which is really
Mhm.
creepy. Yeah, from an artistic point of view, we could spend all evening going through the horrors of, I think, his artistic choices, in addition to which it's ugly. The Knights of Columbus in Washington decided to cover up all of his art at the John Paul II Cultural Center, which, if you go in there, they renovated the entire place in Rupnik mosaic. So that's a big job for them. But look, Rupnik was booted by the Jesuits. He's still a priest with faculties. And the Cardinal Prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, or the Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith, are still in the process of appointing judges to preside at Rupnik's trial. All they'll say is, we've made a list, we're getting close. Why should a case like this remain unresolved, and why are the gears grinding so slowly, Phil?
There's some element of mystery there, but I have to say the arrows point towards Pope Francis. Of course, Rupnik was excommunicated, and then the excommunication was lifted within less than a month. That could not have been done without at least the tacit approval of the Pope. And of course, that's long before his current illness. The Vatican has stalled on this. Pope Francis did eventually say he wanted a trial after first saying he didn't want a trial of Rupnik. That was 2 years ago. And after two
Yeah.
years, what has the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith done? Well, they've made a list of judges. That does not bespeak any urgency. And yet, here's the interesting thing. There does seem to be some action now since the Pope has been ill. And again, I find myself wondering, is that a matter where the Pope's grip on the machinery of the Vatican is weakened and various people are doing what they wanted to do all along? For instance, did the bishop at Lourdes decide to cover up these artworks because he now knows that things are moving in that case at last? I certainly hope so.
Well, Phil, look, it's no secret. Here's what we do know. Rupnik was very close to the Pope. In fact, images by Rupnik still hang in the papal apartment. We've seen them in recent photographs just before his hospitalization. But more importantly, the ubiquity of that art, I'm using the term lightly, you can find it in shrines and churches all over the world. And that's all
Absolutely.
because of his patron, Pope Francis. Because Pope Francis and the Vatican sort of gave him the nod. In fact, he's still on the Vatican website. Every holy day, we're punished by these ugly images, while
Exactly.
Caravaggio and all these gorgeous works are suppressed. So his entire ubiquity is a function of Pope Francis's closeness and the relationship there. So I imagine whatever happens to him will also hinge on that. I'll give you the last word on this.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And I think that Pope Francis now seems to be in a weakened condition. He is not able to attend to details. People who have been delegated the task to try Father Rupnik realize that they can now go ahead with that trial without worrying too much about repercussions, because Pope Francis won't be in a position to punish them.
I want to move on to the U.S. Supreme Court's consideration of Catholic Charities' tax-exempt status as a religiously based organization. A Wisconsin chapter of Catholic Charities challenged the Wisconsin High Court's assertion that they do not qualify for tax exemption because they are not, quote, operated primarily for religious purposes, end quote. This stems from Wisconsin's refusal to allow Catholic Charities to opt out of paying into the state's unemployment insurance system, which is mandatory. The U.S. Supreme Court seems to be sympathetic so far to Catholic Charities, Phil, and the crux of this case seems to be that Catholic Charities is no different from any other nonprofit. Will that hold up, do you think, in court?
Now, from what I saw of the arguments, the oral arguments before the Supreme Court this past Monday, it certainly seems that a majority of the justices will side with Catholic Charities and say that this is not the business of a secular court to decide whether or not this institution complies with the principles of its own faith. In other words, the courts aren't going to tell us that Catholic Charities is not acting as a Catholic institution. And I think that's appropriate. I don't want secular courts to make that determination. I do think it's a very good question for us as Catholics to ask. Is Catholic Charities acting as a Catholic institution?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good internal question. I worry about secular authorities and governments making that call. That's a problem. But before we run out of time, and in a somewhat related vein, actually, the University of Notre Dame announced that it will award its prestigious Laetare Medal to the president of Catholic Charities USA, Carrie Alice Robinson. And the award will be bestowed at this year's commencement in May, as they often are. The medal honors Robinson explicitly for her individual work and expresses support for the work of Catholic Charities. Interestingly enough, the newly inaugurated sitting president of the United States, Donald Trump, will not be asked to deliver this year's commencement address. I covered this on my podcast this week, Phil, and I did some deep diving into this. Clinton spoke, Bush spoke, Obama spoke, and Biden got the Laetare Medal despite his support for abortion. Your thoughts on all of this?
I think it's deliberate. There are two deliberate decisions there, very obviously. One, not inviting Trump to speak. Although, as you point out, the university has typically given an invitation to a newly inaugurated sitting president to come speak. That's one thing. But then, choosing Carrie Robinson in her capacity as head of Catholic Charities USA, Catholic Charities USA is right now involved in a political tug of war with the Trump administration. And she, in her statement thanking Notre Dame for awarding her the Laetare Medal, explicitly said that she was accepting it on behalf of all the employees of Catholic Charities USA. Well, a lot of those employees look likely to be laid off because of decisions made by the Trump administration. So you have a pretty clear setup there, and Notre Dame is letting us know which side they're on.
Yeah, that's unfortunate because it's you have this incredible Catholic institution, such a legacy, and if free inquiry and academic pursuits and engaging the culture, which is what Hesburgh said when he started this Laetare Medal and all of this, if that's the goal, why not invite everybody under the dome? Why restrict it to only certain political parties? I think it makes Notre Dame look horrible, and I don't know why they're engaging in this. They stood firm when Marianne Glendon turned down the Laetare Medal because she felt they were honoring a president in Obama who was so opposed to Catholic teaching on so many levels, she couldn't accept the medal beside him. Now you have a situation where you're not even inviting the sitting president. I'll give you the last word.
Exactly right. It's a partisan sort of thing, and it's explicitly partisan. And if they had given Robinson the Laetare Medal and invited Trump or done neither, it would not be so blatantly political. But to do to honor someone who is currently in a tongue war with the president while conspicuously failing to invite the president, that puts Notre Dame in the position of playing politics, which is just unseemly for an institution of that prestige.
Philip Lawler, we will leave it there, and you can see all of Philip's reporting and commentary at CatholicCulture.org. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.